Welcome to an episode of Wonder Without the Fear. Today we have Holly Marie of Earth Song Healing. She is a shamanistic healer, so she uses those practices to help people go through their different traumas. Welcome to the show, Holly.
Hello, can you see me? Because my computer just went out. Am I there?
Yeah, you are here as far as I can tell.
Okay, I'm back. Interesting.
Okay.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to talk to you. It's been a while since we've
Yeah,
actually seen each other face to face, so I'm really happy to be here.
yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this topic. Before we get into the actual topic on hand, which is going to be Lemuria and the ancient past, can you talk a little bit about how, first of all, you got into what you're doing in your own practice, some of the shamanistic things, because this actually ties into what you know about Lemuria, correct?
Yes, I think it's really important why I got into this work. I was raised in a fear-based Baptist church, very fear-based, very hard Christian. And I always grew up really sick. I had a lot of health issues. And I became a massage therapist for very like cut and dry, nothing spiritual, just very therapeutic massage. And I was still suffering from a ton of really severe depression and really horrific digestion issues. And I got to this point where it's like something's got to change, or I'm going to end up having surgery on my intestines. Like, I'm super depressed. I'm on Prozac. This isn't working. And I walked into this health food store in Antioch, California, and where I used to live. And someone said, "Go to a shaman." And I said, "Okay." I didn't know what it was. I never heard of the word before. I just said, "Okay." But I called the lady and I had a couple sessions with her. And then I ended up becoming her student and then her assistant. And through this work, it literally changed my health. It changed my digestion, my physical health, my mental health, my emotional health. And that's why I want to bring this work to others, because it literally changes your life.
Yeah, it's true. It's amazing how these modalities break into the emotional aspect, and then when we break through that barrier, we realize, what we were missing, and then we can, change our lives accordingly when we break that emotional trauma.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so this work, if I could just segue,
Hmm.
I and one, I'm not a shaman. I just use the modalities. I'm
Hmm.
just using the modalities that are highly, highly effective. And so I started getting deeper and deeper into the work, and it led me to sit with the Caro tradition of Peru.
Hmm.
And from there, that's when kind of the deep dive took into, well, where does this work really, really come from? And it does
Right.
not come from, the high Andes of Peru. There's a past that's deeper than that.
Right. Right.
And yeah.
So before I'm just going to lay some ground before we get into a little bit of what you're talking about, because some people kind of poo-poo the idea that we have this ancient past, and I mean, a lot of us have probably heard about Atlantis and so on and so forth. We have the works of Plato to thank for that, and many other people, but that's sort of where one most people point to. We also have to look at some of the things that have come to the forefront in the last 20 years or so. We have Göbekli Tepe, and that is known to be at least 13,000 plus years old. We have people like Graham Hancock, that he has this book talking about the Americas, and John Anthony West and Dr. Robert Schoch, that talks about these ancient civilizations, not only in the old world that we call, but even in the, obviously now Graham Hancock is focusing a lot of his work in the Americas and North and South America. So the fact that these things are starting to come to the forefront, we probably have a greater understanding of where the possibility of these ancient civilizations actually being real. So, Holly, can you let us know, what led you to a little bit of the story, what led you to Peru, and what were some of these shamans and elders telling you about Lemuria?
Okay, so I did just get back from Peru, where I was supposed to go sit with these elders and do all these ceremonies, and we were in quarantine. So unfortunately, that trip got completely just derailed. But when the Caros come here to the U.S., and when I have that opportunity, I'm able to sit with the Caro, the Hopi, the Mayan. We operator who was actually from the Great White Solar Brotherhood, who came up here, which was super fascinating. And so all of my stuff is orally passed down. Is what I'm getting talking to other people. It's very much in resonance with the law of one. And I personally have not read the law of one. It just didn't quite gravitate to me, not for good or bad. It's just I like to sit and get the information orally. And so that's where I've gotten it from. So we is what I understand is that, and from reading very old books as well, is what I understand is that when Lemuria was the mother continent, the motherland, and the actual name is Mu, when it began to shift after 400,000 years, people had the opportunity to migrate. Some went to the Asias, some went to the Americas. And that's why we can weave a common thread between all alternative medicines. Like you have the Vedics, you have the meridians in China, Chinese medicine, you have Tai Chi, you've got the natural herbal remedies in many, many cultures sprinkled across the globe. And it is literally because some of these people went to the Asias and some went to Americas. And it's really interesting because when I was able to sit with this one elder, they taught us these, quote, dances that would bring in the sun into Tai Tai. It would like bring in the sun. And we're not talking about like our sun. We're talking about the grand central sun, Alceo.
Right.
And so these dances, one was to clear energy, one was to bring in the energy of the sun. It was Tai Chi. It was Tai Chi. And so I said, hey, I have this theory, and they said yes, like all of these ancient teachings come from Mu, the motherland. And that's what's really fascinating is today we're still using these practices, even though we might not be giving credit to the actual root of where they came from. That's kind of not important. The fact is that we're still putting these ancient practices into use for our health and wellness.
Very cool. Yeah, that's really interesting. I remember you were mentioning, some of the Tai Chi. What are some other things that you've heard about the ancients that you were tying in? We were talking earlier about the mystics. Can you bring that into where that story comes from and what some of the mystical teachings are maybe imprinting onto the earth?
Yes. So the actual Caro are not shamans. They're mystics.
Mm-hmm.
They are mystic. There is a difference. The shamans are more into the plant medicines, the psychotropic medicines, the soul retrieval aspect of things. The mystics are more into like the quantum physics aspects of things, really manipulating your reality with your mind. That they don't sacrifice anything. They're very connected, and so the story goes, and again, these are all stories. So anytime you find a story, my computer just went black on me again. Am I still here?
You're still here.
That's so bizarre. So anytime you hear a story and you investigate a story, you're going to find many different stories. So this is just my teaching. It's just information. So the great mystics come from Venus,
Mm-hmm.
which I just found out again that correlates with the law. So they came down from Venus and began to create here, and this is not the Pleiadians, Venus, and they have the Temple of the Sun. So the Vijaya came, the living sun. So the mystics say that we literally, physically, not a concept, that we physically have a sun lives within our heart. And we get that life force energy from the sun behind our sun, the grand central sun. So when they came down here, and the Wiracocha, the living sun, through his staff, it landed in Cusco, Peru. And that's where they created the Coricancha, the sun temple. And from there, they had these gold relics called huacas, but these gold relics actually have like powers the way that they're made. And so when the conquistadors came, they moved the Temple of the Sun. They took the relics out. They replaced them with ones. Like they were still gold. They weren't the original ones. And they moved these relics to an unknown place. And the rumor has it that they would wear the gold striking plate so they could levitate. Each gold striking plate had a different frequency matched up to that person. So if you had a striking plate, it would be your resonance. Mine would be different from. And with these frequencies, you could do levitation. You could go into multidimensional worlds, all kinds of other amazing things. And I feel like how that's trickled down is that we are doing transcendental meditation, right? We are doing the work of sticks, like the energy work, healing work is all the work of the mystics. And especially the quantum physics, like when you get more Dr. Joe Dispenza and Dr. Bruce Lipton, which I know you are, I feel like that's in it. There's actual, so the Caro in my lineage, when we hold dense energy, when we hold trauma, it's a dense energy. It doesn't mean it's good or bad. It's just a dense energy. But when we're in that dense energy, and our perception is that it's going to our lower chakras, our survival chakras, and we're not going to be able to ascend. So it's what's going to happen. The prophecy said that we're going to close down our first three chakras, and our heart is going to become our anchor. That's going to become our root. Galactic chakra will begin to open up. And it's very interesting because when you in actual ran the societies, it's like when a partnership would dissolve, like a marriage,
right,
they would have this total agreement, so there was no animosity. So every single dense energy was muted. We have these terrible breakups. In that time when they had 400,000, didn't have any animosity, remorse, leaving a relationship, or being a partner in sort of feel we need to today. Like we have the mediation and a lot of Buddhist temples where we end in the acts of forgiveness. And so I feel like that's really what we're still carrying forth. And we just need to kind of redirect our focus back to these practices.
Right. Yeah, that last part broke up on me, but I think I got the gist of it. It's really interesting talking about moving through these like lower centers and into the heart. And I'm actually just going to backtrack a little bit, and people are probably like wondering why Holly was at the beginning talking about Venus, like they thought this is like a planet that you couldn't live on. But if you go back to, I believe NASA actually wrote an article, I'm just going to pull it up. It was August 11th, 2016. NASA wrote an article saying that the climate modeling suggests that Venus may have been habitable. So, meaning that it had oxygen, water, land, and all the things for life. And there's also really interesting, I think they're called anomaly hunters, and they look at actual NASA photos, and they look at just anomalistic objects, and some of them had pointed out some interesting anomalies on Venus that could be possible structures, so that they're not just regular rock formation, and that's super interesting to kind of point that out, that these are things that are very possible that could have been in our past. So I just wanted to point that out before people are like, how is that possible? It's too close to the sun, and so on and so forth. So could you go a little bit into like your understanding of the opening of what we're going through as we're moving through these traumas, how we're like creating more space for the heart?
Yes, and just I'm really glad that you brought up that article. I just want to piggyback on that really quick. Mm-hmm. Ken Rolla, freshandalive.com. He's phenomenal scientist down in Florida. He used to work in some sort of computer engineering before he's doing what he's doing now. And where he worked, there was a huge picture of Mars, the Mars rover. And I know we're talking about Venus, but we're going to switch over to Mars. And the sky was actually blue. And if you go back into Adamski's writings, who NASA did hire, and then they kind of ridiculed and fired because he was too connected. He was having too much contact. All of our planets have to have some sort of atmosphere, or they can't be a solid object. Mm-hmm. So yes, I'm glad you went back into it, because to me, it's just so normal that yes, we come from different star systems. Yes, we had habitation on planets before. It's just very normal to me. So I'm glad that you went back and backed that up a little bit. And you asked me about the situation and how we're moving through with the heart space, like the actual current situation.
Yeah, the current situation that we're in today, we're being forced to go through these different levels of the chakra into the heart, whether those other three disappear or they're just transmuted in more power into the heart, as something like Dr. Bruce Lipton talked about, and Joe Dispenza talked about as well. What doesn't really matter, but the point is we're focusing more in on the heart, and we're being forced now as a species to really look at all this information that's coming to the forefront, and we're seeing more and more truth. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, and how that relates to and how that relates to sort of maybe an imprinting of the old style of the mystic teachings of Lemuria.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it's really actually dry reading and dry research. It's dry because it's not about channeling angels or, you know, looking for a spaceship. It's literally about going within and finding that forgiveness, finding that peace within, finding that resolution. And that's really boring for a lot of people. But when you find that resolution, that peace, that forgiveness, that's when we start to clear out the lower survivals, because we get that confidence, we get that knowing, we get that inner wisdom that anchors the unconditional love in our heart, which becomes that reflected reality of unconditional love. It's almost like a 0 point energy, and disease can't exist there. Animosity can't exist there. Nothing negative can exist in this 0 point. And that's when we get into the Tibetan monks in the rainbow body, when every single thought is love, even in the lower chakra system, right? Like you push out the fear and the survival and like the needing shelter and the needing food and the need, because you know it's just going to be there for you. And that's when we eat less. We don't get sick anymore. You know, we don't have worries. It's because we're anchoring up here. And in the shamanic culture, they say that the throat chakra is the gateway to the subconscious or the underworld. And so as we move into our heart, we can actually move in and clear these worlds from the past and even clear our future lives, because we move out of the linear into the cyclical. Like time becomes a cycle, not linear. So we're actually able to move into the underworlds to heal the past, the present, and the future. And and so right now, I think with this whole COVID-19, it's really two things are going on. Well, there's a lot more than two things, but we are literally kind of in this war of the dark versus the light. And if we feed into the fear, it's going to shoot us right back down into our first three chakras for survival, creating the fear, the panic, the depression, the sadness. That's a problem, because when you get into more esoteric teachings, and galactic teachings, it's like the archons are going to feed off that energy. It's the negative energy. It's called loosh, and it's actually literally like food for the dark negative entities. And so I feel like that's going on interdimensional levels. We're in a galactic war. And I also feel like this is a really huge time to be still, to be at home, to lose everything. Like to lose our financial structure, to lose so many structures that we had. It's going to bring up all of our shadows. And that's when we have the opportunity to either sink and spiral downward or surrender and know that we get the opportunity now to become our own architect. Like we can recreate and become our own architect. And before I got on the phone with you earlier, I was thinking what the number one weapon is today. I think the number one weapon right now, because the powers to be want us divided, it is the keyboard. And we sit behind our handy dandy screens and we can project all this hate because somebody has a different opinion than us. And we can just project all this hate, hurt somebody, all from a keyboard. And it's like we are literally playing right into the hands of the powers to be right now, because we refuse. So many of us refuse to do our inner work. And I know that's a little harsh, but
no, it's definitely something that needs to be said, and and we need to recognize that. And that brings me into sort of my next sort of question. From your understanding, this is from the mystic side of Lemuria, and this is sort of like some sort of I mean, there was positive things to Atlantis, of course, but there was sort of, from my understanding, there's that downfall of the two colliding of the two worlds. And I'm just wondering if you could sort of speak about that, because it's relating to what's going on today, from my understanding.
That's really interesting. So, a book that I really, really love was written in the 30s, and it's called the Lost People of Shasta, like the Lemurians, right? And it was written by the Rosicrucians, and this is the book that really goes into the really like cut and dry, very super dry reading, really goes into their culture. But it's interesting because there's a phrase in there where they talk about the Lemurians going up in airships to look at what is it? To look at the blind culture. They talk about a blind culture. And I'm like reading the book, and I'm like, what is, like, it was very literal, a blind culture. And I'm like, it can't, that's not what it means. That's right. Not what it means. And so I think it was not being awake. And so I think the big clash is we all know, like, Atlantis had very extreme technology, but there were like 5 races, and the Gagans were the white race of Atlantis, and they started to learn how to heal with crystals. So they became the superior race. And then they became very frightened of germs. And what's very interesting is they covered everything in what's translated into hard white snow. And this is actually out of another reading. They started to plant trees that did not flower. And, you know, sometimes it almost makes me wonder that maybe it's not the past, it's just a parallel. And we're literally able to look at this parallel from a future perspective and see the destruction of what Monsanto is doing. You know, why do we need to genetically modify all these seeds? It's because we're not awake enough to tread softly on the earth. Well, the Lemurians were like, okay, Chris, I've got a problem with you. Let's totally talk this out. And we're both 100% at peace. They also, just like the Aboriginals of Australia, the Lemurians also had the ability to end their life when they wanted. So if you're 16 years old and you're like, hey, you know what? I feel like I've lived my 16 years. I feel like I want to end this now. They believed in reincarnation. They would have a family meeting, and everybody had to be at peace with it. There was never any animosity left. And then, so you get over to Atlantis, and they had all this technology, and they were in fear, and they were like advanced beings stuck in survival mode.
Right.
And yeah, I feel like that's kind of where we're headed today. I know there's a great awakening. I know people are waking up by the masses, but it's about time. Right? It's about time. We've done this. And, you know, 2 years ago, I sit with these tribes every year. And I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, I sat with them, and they were literally like, do not put your bad energy into the earth anymore. So we've always been taught, you know, in Reiki and like even in the native cultures, like, give your bad energy to the earth. If she likes it, she transmutes it. That's where we put our bad energy. Not anymore, because of fracking, which is very physical, and all of the stuff that we've dumped into the earth, she's done. She's full. It is now time to not do that anymore. So we put the bad energy into a candle. We give it to the sun. We do not give it to the earth. And it's really interesting because there's people who will argue that. And it's like, no, we have got to honor the earth to move forward. She's in a transition. She's turning into a star. You can't have this dense energy to gridlock her evolution of turning into a star or her ascension. And so we all have to move and become a little bit more fluid in our actions and be willing to learn, even if these old traditions are now coming out saying like, hey, that's not it anymore. And I actually had a client who does a lot of self Reiki, and she said every time she came to me and she's like, Holly, every time I do Reiki, my daughter gets petrified. Like petrified. I'm like, that's a super strong word. Like, what is going on? So we had her explain the whole thing to me, like her whole routine, right? And I said, and then she's like, and then I brushed the energy off. And I said, well, then what? And she's like, I'm done. And that was the big thing that we can't do anymore. I said, gather the energy, put it in a candle. The very next time she did her self Reiki, she gathered the energy up, she put it in the candle, literally, like I swear, literally, she calls me up and she's like, it worked. My daughter came in, she was happy. She started like her daughter's 4, pointing to the wedding pictures, asking about our wedding, asking about Jesus, which she had never done before. And so we've got to be fluid in our actions. We've got to learn to move and bend with this ascension process. And if that means no more putting in the earth, then we have to put the ego aside, do what these tribes are asking to do, because they hold the knowledge. Like, you can't see it, but on my wall over this way, it's actually that way. That way, because I'm doing. But I actually have the codex of the new Mayan calendar. It's huge. So when we flipped over from 2012, and it was, as Hollywood likes to say, the end of the world. No, total capitalization is all it was a turn of the calendar. And I actually have the new calendar. It is fascinating. And 6 tribes came together to put this calendar together, and in the center of the calendar is the divine universal Mary, not the Catholic Mary Magdalene, but the divine universal Mary Magdalene. And that is because we are stepping into the feminine now. We are actually changing. We have to become more nurturing. And this is exactly what happened when the Catholics came, when the conquistadors came, when we gave the natives smallpox with our blankets. That was the power struggle that really rooted in the masculine energy. And now it's time to bring back the feminine in a healed state. Not the angry feminists. Like, if women come back in power the way a lot of them are right now, it's going to be a disaster. We have got, including myself, like, I have really, really had to work on getting into my feminine energy. It's the nurturing that has to come back. And in that nurturing comes the compassion of knowing when we need the male energy to blend and dance with the feminine energy, because we're becoming that unified field, right? So the mystics say that North America is the mind and South America is the heart, which I'm sure we could just ban that to the whole Northern Hemisphere, to the Southern Hemisphere. So we've got the mind and the heart. We want to bring that together into a unified field.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's lots of the indigenous teachings throughout the Americas that talks about, the Condor and the eagle coming together. And I know a lot of people, a lot of my friends that have gone down to Central and South America, and they're told by the different elders down there that, yeah, you're the one to like bring this energy from the Central and South America up into North America, and vice versa. So they're just like bringing and intertwining all this information, and they're all of them are saying that this is the time period for all this energy to intertwine and intermingle together. So that's interesting you bring that up.
So and you probably know this, but a lot of people may not, is what happened is when the Spanish conquistadors came, some of these Q'ero, which are the descendants of the Inca, hid in the hills for 500 years. Not hills, they hid in the mountains, like the high Andes, for 500 years. And then they got the message from Spirit that they need to come down and teach the round-eyed ones. Well, we're the round-eyed ones, the northern, the white people, the Europeans. We need a descent. We need to learn these ways now. So absolutely, they want this. They want to stay secret, especially like where I sit. We can't have any pictures, no recordings, no Facebook, nothing. Like when I get the invitation, it's a phone call. It is okay that there's people sitting with the Caro that publicize it. There's different tribes, neither good or bad. It's all very good information, but somehow, some way, I got into a tribe that doesn't like the publicity. So, but yes, they want this information out because now is the time. Like there's plateaus up on the high mountain range, like Apu Solcantai, one of the big mountains in Peru. And when those grasses begin to die, is kind of like a micro of the macro of the earth is beginning to die. And they also say as you move into inner earth, which is very Lemurian, all the inner earth, Shambhala, Telos, when you move into inner earth, some of the big lakes, they're on the outside of the earth, but they're on the inside of the earth, right? And so when the inside of the lake on inner earth gets polluted, that's a huge message that the earth needs help. And from what I've heard is the inner earth side of Lake Titicaca, which is the highest lake in the world down in Peru that borders Bolivia, is now becoming polluted on the inner earth. So now's the time. And with this whole COVID crisis, we're seeing the whales come back. We're seeing the fish come back into the canals of Sicily. The animals are coming out. And it's like, okay, are we just going to shift back to normal and become destructive, or are we going to shift back to normal? And when I mean normal, I mean no masks, no gloves, no fear. But are we going to shift back into a more harmonious way where we can still coexist with the animals? And the whole thing is about walking lighter on Mother Earth, not just with our consumption and polluting the environment. That's just a reflection of the inner poison of our thoughts and the inner poison that we hold in our hearts because we're not working on our trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes me think of, talking about that inner earth sort of connection, is that brings me to a point, that connection with Mount Shasta, and that seems to be a heart. There seems to, some people say that there's, the heart chakra is all, different places of the earth. There's probably multiple areas of heart chakras, but what seems to be that connection to Lemuria and connection to the heart with that, and then what's being transmuted, possibly.
So there's just so much information out there, and it's so crazy to you hear one thing, you hear another thing. There is also this fascinating story that I just want to touch on really fast. There's a story that California, Oregon, and Washington used to be its own separate island ruled by a black queen, Queen Khalifa, and there was this black race on these islands. Now, it's very interesting is when you try to research this, it's like a tale, it's like a folklore. There's only one like tribute to her, one it's a mosaic down in El Segundo, and it's this garden tribute to Queen Khalifa. Now, it's interesting is on Orcas Island, which are the islands off Washington, it is said that there is a Lemurian portal tunnel that goes all the way underground to the Anasazi land in New Mexico. So we're still talking about these links under the ocean, these tunnels that are still talked about that go all the way into New Mexico. Now, what does that have to do with Shasta, right? So they're saying that Shasta was like the cradle of where life actually began. And again, it's really hard to say because the continents have shifted. Every single culture has their creation story. And then, we've got Shambhala in Tibet, the underground city. But supposedly when Atlantis and Lemuria begin to shift and merge, a lot of these souls came into Telos, which is the city within Shasta. It's an etherical city within Shasta in another dimension that holds up to like 1 million or so people. They have cities. They have a jade healing temple that I take people to on journeys where we get 3 Lemurian guides, one for our physical, one for our mental, and one for our emotional well-being. And you go into this jade healing center, which jade green is the color of the heart. And then you go into the whole aspects of Adama coming there. The Adama is the violet flame of the heart, and he carries the 7 rays of consciousness, which is very interesting because there's also a place in Peru that we're not allowed to go to that is this village where they carry all these teachings of Lemuria and Mu too. So somehow there was a convergence of the Lemurians going into this underground city in Shasta. And there's many stories of the people from with the inner earth in Shasta, and then Adama in the violet flame of the heart, holding these 7 rays of consciousness there. So how it became the actual or theoretical heart chakra, I don't know, but it does just seem to be this place where there are some extraordinary energies up there. The last time I was in Shasta, I ran into my good friend Cherie, who does the Ascension sessions, and she was with Tracy Ash. And I had to leave that day, but they had an amazing sighting of crafts that night. And I've seen a lot of other amazing crafts up in Shasta. So whatever portals that holds to the inner earth, to the upper worlds, or to the surface earth and to upper worlds, it's like a huge convergence point.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I didn't realize that about the connection between Lemuria and Shasta. That's super interesting. I mean, you hear of all these different stories. And just I'm just going to bring that back. When I say stories, when you're talking to shamans or mystics, I'll just look at one particular one that I know for sure said this. Credo Mutua, who happens to be in South Africa, is a Zulu. He actually just passed away this year. He would talk about how before the oral traditions had to be passed down verbatim. So you couldn't just say, Chris is wearing a green shirt. No, Chris is wearing a green shirt that had all this artwork, like a mushroom and a turtle and a moon and all. Like, you had to really know what was being said, and it had to be repeated over and over and over again. And before the next person that was to be picked to be the mystic or the shaman, they had to not only have all these stories done verbatim, but they had to go through all these different rituals. And when that particular person when that shaman was ready to die, then there was some sort of ritual that went on that they were able to, through their DNA, to get all of this information and all of the stories transmitted into their soul. So this is something that is still talked about today. And I'm sure, and I've heard these stories in Colombia, for example, and down in through Bolivia, and I'm sure it's similar in Peru. So when people talk about stories, these are traditions that are passed on, and they take these oral traditions very seriously, and to make sure that all the details are correct from each person. So I just want to talk a little bit about that.
Yes. And so that's why in the beginning I said this is just a concept, because the elders that I sit with speak Quechuan, like Rumi Simi, the mother tongue.
Yeah.
And then it has to go from Quechuan to Spanish to English. So it's this is a concept.
Right.
It is not verbatim.
Right.
So only their lineage, only the Caro, there's 6 dialects of Quechua. So only the Caro coming down in that tradition are having the actual verbatim. And that's why it's really important. And Canadians are like really on top of this, I think, more than Americans. But well, no, seriously, it's every Canadian I've talked to be like, you don't call yourself a shaman, right? And I'm like, no. I'm a practitioner, right? I'm practicing the modalities. Now in America, you'll see everywhere people call themselves shamans. Well, they're not. They're not. And the mystics say, the shamans say, when anyone calls themselves a shaman, run, because they're in ego. They are in ego. I do have to tell people what I do. I practice these modalities, but it doesn't make me anything. So it's very interesting that people will just grab these concepts and anchor it in stone. I know the translation that I'm getting has been passed down multiple times, so it is just a concept. But then I mix it in with other readings, other teachings. So yes, absolutely. And I think it's very clear that we have a very clear distinction to what's a shaman, what's a mystic, and who's practicing the modalities. And that brings us into the 4th dimensional split. There's an upper and a lower 4D. And the upper 4D is the people who just pass the work on, right? Like when I teach, because I do teach the medicine wheel in the more Four Winds tradition. So I teach the modalities. And when I teach, it's like I'm passing on a concept. I'm teaching you these modalities that are highly effective. It's a concept that I'm passing on, right? The student grows their own medicine. And it's really important. So there's a split, and the upper 4D is the people who just pass on the work. The lower 4D are the people who like have to claim the label. I'm a shaman. I'm a Reiki master. I'm a light worker. No, you're none of it and you're all of it. And it's ego when you have to claim. People get really bent about that, but it's when you have to claim a label, and not a label, but like a thing. You're in ego. You're in attachment, right? Like you have to rise into that non-attachment where you're just sharing a concept. I mean, my work, the people go as deep as they want to go. If they want to go into a past life, we're going to go into a past life. If they want to do a soul retrieval, they're going to do a soul retrieval. If they want to keep it light and fluffy on the surface, that's where it's going to go. It's nothing more than a mirror of how deep they want to go. They might not always be conscious of where they're going to go, but there is an aspect of innate inner consciousness that already knows. And that's the heart. Like the heart is the first organ developed at birth. That's the real brain. When we get into the brain up here, it's just the talk box. It's just the ego. And that's why these modalities in Dr. Joe Dispenza and Bruce Lipton and these Four Winds modalities are so effective, because it bypasses the ego. It goes right past the ego. It goes so much deeper than that. And that's where the truth really lies. And if you're not going beneath the ego, you're in a story. You're in a false perception.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of truth to that. And I will say that, or I mean, this is just my perspective, and I think you would kind of agree because I think we talked about that. There's two aspects of the ego. There's like the false ego, and then there's just the self that identifies me as Chris and you as Holly, and your again sort of your story, but they like allow us to at least, well, I'm experiencing this, so I can have an understanding of what this focus is, I guess. And that would be my only sort of difference between you know, what you said and yeah, what my understanding is, and that would be very basic, but yeah.
Right. And it's all a perception and an experience.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all gonna, I mean, we could get a third and a fourth person here too, and they're all gonna have a different description or a different experience. And that's it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mean, there is a truth. I mean, there is a truth that we, I feel like we have to have a certain level of truth in our life.
Mm-hmm.
But the individual experience is always going to vary a little bit because we're all these like tiny little seeds of one consciousness in our unique expression, and that's what makes it so cool. And I think a lot of the problems stem is from when we're not accepting or having compassion. But I do want to be very, very clear that there is still truth. Like there are still bad things going on in the world that we have to clear. There's still certain realities that we have to look at, like we got the red pill and the blue pill, and the blue pill is going to keep us asleep. The red pill is going to wake us up.
Yeah, true enough.
I mean, and I run across a lot of people who really gravitate into this new age scene, but they're still, I want to be very gentle with my wording because we're all on our path, but a lot of people gravitate into this new age scene, and it's almost like there's a lot of spiritual bypassing going on. It's like they want to have this experience, they want to have all this stuff, but they're not looking at the truth. They're still thinking that, the mainstream media is telling you the truth, that your doctor is telling you the truth. Like, hey, you've got anxiety, take the pill. There's no such thing as anxiety being the root cause. There's trauma that's the root cause. Anxiety is the side effect. So we've got this whole altered illusion that's just on the surface. And when we stay on the surface, we never get to the core. We never heal anything.
Yeah, that's definitely true. So Holly, is there something that you would like to, some thoughts, some ideas that you'd like to leave us with before we end today?
I know. How did that go so fast?
I know.
I just looked at the little, I was like, oh my gosh. I think we're in a really crucial time right now. The Hopi talk about the red kachina and the blue kachina. The mystics talk about the earth turning into a star. I just really want people to find the beauty in each day. And I'm not talking about just being airy-fairy and burning some sage and everything's fine. I'm talking about finding beauty in really making that hard decision to forgive somebody, to forgive a perpetrator. Doesn't make it okay, but we have to find that within ourselves and release our resentment. And when we learn to release that resentment and that anger and that really dense sadness and energy, our whole world shifts and it moves right into the collective. And I think it's really important right now that we all do our shadow work and not be afraid of it.
Thank you so much, Holly.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Holly. And then one last thing is, no, it was all good here on this end. where can we support you? What's your website? How can we contact you? So on and so forth. How can we support you?
Thank you. I appreciate that. My website is earthsonghealings.com. You can find me on Facebook at Holly Marie. And I do have like a micro YouTube channel. It's super tiny. And it's Holly Marie Earth Song Healing. So I'm in the process of getting more, because I do hypnotherapy as well. And I'm in the process of trying to get more content out there just so people can have some free resources to go to. So
okay, awesome.
Chris,
all right, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I know we keep talking on each other, but I know when we talked on the phone too, it's just like time warped, right? Like it just completely time warped. But thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. You've had some great people on, Teresa and Randy, and I'm totally honored that you had me on too.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And yeah, like I said, make sure that you guys subscribe here, like this video, and check out Holly's work. And we'll see you on the flip side, guys. Take care. Lots of love.
Bye.